And I'm delighted to welcome Nick Jones on the left. Do I mean left? Yes.
Hi.
No, right for you. And Nick Bates from the specialist e-learning and development recruitment company, Blue Eskimo. Sorry, learning and development recruitment company, Blue Eskimo. As many of you may know, Blue Eskimo have been in attendance at this conference really ever since it began. And for the last 9 years, they've been releasing at this conference their latest results of their annual salary and skills survey. And therefore, today, we're absolutely delighted that not just launching it here, they've actually come along today to actually share it with us in detail and really look at the findings that they've got and how that relates to L&D. So I'm going to hand you over now to Nick. And Nick, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And thanks very much for coming along to the session today, lunchtime session. So I guess you're going to want to eat some sandwiches. You might want to walk out. Hopefully, if you do, you might want to come back in again. You might just want to have a power nap or a snooze at the back. And if you do, that's absolutely fine. What we're going to be doing now is just running through really 3 key areas. The first of which is a look at our annual salary and work survey that we conduct. That'll take around 20 minutes or so. We're then going to look at and talk about career progression, not just for us, but for our teams, and also for learning and development as a function and how we can progress the sector that we operate in. We're then going to have what we hope is going to be a bit of an interactive session on skills, where ultimately we will be looking at skills in the past, current skills, and also future skills over the next sort of 4 or 5 years. And we're hoping that you're going to help us with that. We'd like to learn something today, and we'd be very interested in your views on that. So I'm Nick Jones, this is Nick Bates. We run and operate a recruitment consultancy called Blue Eskimo. And we specialise in learning and development across all disciplines. We work really with an eclectic mix of providers of learning services, so many of the organisations you'll see on the exhibition floor, and the corporate world, and also academic institutions. As I said, across disciplines, so that's anything from kind of business development people for vendors, right the way through the design and development and delivery roles, and also the more strategic roles, heads of organisational development, learning and development. So the survey itself, we've been running the survey for the last 9 years. The respondents, about 650 on average per year. We put the survey out around the end of November, so it's open for about a month, 6 weeks to a month. All respondents from within the learning and development sector, mix of skills, mix of roles and disciplines, just like the kind of roles that we recruit for. Primarily UK respondents. About 5% outside of the UK, which I believe is in line with the visitor numbers that we have over at the exhibition floor. The survey is a salary survey, yes, but it's primarily a work survey. The idea is to give a broad view of the sector, a gut feel, really, for the sector and the market that we all operate in. So we will be able to kind of anecdotally provide some specific detail, particularly on things like salaries, which we'll try and pepper in a little bit today. But if anyone wants to talk specifically about salaries in particular locations for particular disciplines, we thought it might be easier to take that offline. We'll be around in the conference over the next 2 days. We're also downstairs on stand M13, and we'd be delighted to pick that conversation up if you do want to talk about specifics.
Hello everyone. So as Nick mentioned, the first segment of this session will be with regards to the salary survey. We'll be looking at it from both the point of view of what people are earning, not in obviously microscopic detail because we haven't got all week, but equally what people think, what are their sentiments, how do they feel about their jobs in L&D as well. So to kick things off, it's one thing to reassure you, the pie chart is not as complicated as it might first appear. We've got increments of £5,000 per colour banding, and the percentages in brackets just represent last year's figures, so there's a point of comparison that we'll be making from time to time. 80% of respondents earn above the average annual salary, which is about £28,000. But that's not greatly surprising because the majority of the respondents to the survey are in positions like L&D manager, project manager, instructional designer. So you'd expect the vast majority, if not all of those roles, to be sitting above the £28,000 mark anyway. If you're in one of those roles and you're not getting paid over £28,000, then I'd suggest probably having a chat with your boss. And if you've already done that, then you can come and talk to us about it. But the overall picture is that nearly half of respondents were in the 30 to 45,000 bracket, which is very similar to last year actually, not much movement there. However, where there was quite a sizable shift and quite a big increase was in the 45 to 50 and 50 to 55k brackets. And as you can see, because of the fairly static numbers in the higher bandings, then actually that's at the expense of those higher bandings. So there's a shift more downwards as opposed to upwards. We then asked the same question, but to the contractor and the freelancer community. So we were asking them obviously about their day rates. The vast majority, nearly 29%, were in the £200 to £300 per day bracket. Again, almost identical to last year's figure. However, we see a similar pattern forming here in terms of an increase in the next higher banding of £300 to £400 per day, up from 15% to nearly 22%, but at the expense of the higher bands. So we could fairly safely assume that contractors are, in some cases, taking drops from the higher bands to get contracts, maybe longer term contracts, in the lower bandings. So what about salary increases or not? What have people been enjoying pay rises, and what has that trend looked like over the course of the 9 years that we've been doing the salary survey? This year, a record-breaking year as far as pay rises go. So the biggest percentage of respondents getting pay rises this year than any other previous year, actually up from 49% last year to over 60% this year. So a big leap in the number of people who managed to secure pay rises in the last 12 months. If we look at that in the context of the salary survey since records began, if you like, we can see that actually not only is it a record year for pay increases, but actually it's the best year since 2008. So since pre-recession levels, this is the best year ever. What we can see is that, not surprisingly, something called the recession came along and pay rises took a drop off a cliff there to just 34%. However, what we've seen since then is a steady year-on-year increase up until last year, when we saw it go to 48 and a big leap up to 60% this year. So heartening news in that respect, certainly. So the next question we asked was, how hard do you work? Unpaid hours. How many people put unpaid hours into their work? And we can see that the L&D community as a whole are a pretty hard-working bunch. 62% of people regularly work longer hours than they're paid for. However, that is quite a significant drop from last year, 83%. We don't know the explicit reasons, but one of them could be that since the recession, people have obviously been working hard, keeping their heads down year on year, and perhaps we're seeing a gradual decline in people feeling that they need to do that and perhaps getting that work-life balance back again a wee bit. But clearly, as we can see, still a hard-working bunch.
So, salaries not looking too bad. We're on the rise, I guess. But it's not all about salary. It's about benefits as well. It's about what our HR colleagues like to call total reward. And that's really an area that as recruiters we're finding people are having to put a lot more thought into. There's a lot more interest from candidates, particularly about the total reward package. People are thinking about what they get in their current positions in a way that they possibly haven't over the last few years, whilst we've perhaps been in a recessionary environment. So this is another one of those kind of data slides. It just really tells us, based on the question, what benefits do you receive, where the key numbers are. And of course, pensions figure quite significantly, either as a company pension or as a contribution to a personal pension. The fact that those numbers don't tie up perhaps suggests that there are obviously contractors in there that won't have pension provision, and there are also going to be individuals that work for small businesses which perhaps don't have pension contributions now, but through auto-enrolment will do very shortly. Things like occupational sick pay, we can expect to see quite a large number, 40%. Many of us work in large organisations, we would expect these types of benefits. Critical illness insurance, things like critical illness insurance actually are jumping, they're leaping year on year, and that's interesting because it's a relatively low cost benefit which we can give to our employees, which demonstrates some commitment to them as individuals and might make them feel better about their total reward package. Things like cars, things like share options, obviously very relevant, but not necessarily relevant to everybody. It depends obviously on the organisation that you work for. The key things here are that there are about 20% of people that don't get benefits at all. And as I said, that probably is due to the fact that we've got quite a large contractor cohort in L&D, lots of flexible resource that's brought in for short periods of time. So we can perhaps set that to one side. The overall picture, I think, is pretty good. Looking at benefits that are received in other sectors away from learning and development, I think we're reasonably well spread, but again, that could be explained by the fact that we're reasonably well spread in terms of the types of sectors that we as learning professionals work within. So we get reasonable reward, we get reasonable salaries. The question is, what do we feel about that? And that's the next set of questions. It's more the feeling piece. And we ask the question, how do you feel your salary compares with the industry average? And it's interesting that the big number here is about right. So it's either about right, higher than average, or lower than average. Higher than average is always at around about 10%. Perhaps some of you guys in here are in that banding there. Most people are in the about right banding, and it's actually quite high. 60% of people, a significant leap from last year, actually feel that their salary levels are about right. And that probably correlates to what Nick said about people getting pay rises. We know that people are getting pay rises at the moment. They have for maybe the last couple of years. Part of that is due to the fact there are more roles, there's competition for talent, and sometimes pay rises happen because someone's left or said that they were going to leave and there's been a counter offer. Sometimes organisations are just doing well and feel that it's the right thing to do. Some completely ignore it, and you find then people in the lower than average bracket perhaps not so happy with the way that they're remunerated in their salaries. 31%, still quite a big number, but it has dropped. So looking back from the sentiment perspective since 2008, when our records began, we can see how the numbers have moved. Ultimately, we started in 2008 at the peak when we hadn't quite yet had the recessionary period. 56% of people feeling in L&D that their salaries were about right. Now we can see with some bumps in the road that it's gone up to 59%. We can see in 2015 that it was actually its lowest ebb, and potentially the significant increase recently has been brought about by the fact that people have been receiving rises. The same questions asked in relation to benefits, and this is a slightly more interesting point because, again, higher than average, lower than average, or about right. The lower than average piece here is quite significant. It's 44% of people, and that hasn't really changed. It's come down slightly since last year, but it hasn't really changed over the last few years. We've got 41% of people in the about right space, but it's that lower than average piece which is probably more of a challenge in terms of keeping hold of the resources that we want to keep hold of and making sure that we feel that we're remunerated in the right way. So this is the about right line, and we can see that we started in 2008, benefits-wise, 45% of people being reasonably happy. It dropped quite significantly in 2012, end of 2012, and possibly that can be explained by the fact that we did have the recessionary period. People probably have been pleased to kind of keep their jobs in that period, you know, happy to keep their jobs. 2012, when we start to get some confidence back, there are more roles available. That's when maybe people are starting to look at their salaries, their reward, and we can see that the kind of the sentiment dropped somewhat, and we're at the 41% level now, which is lower than it was in 2008. There you go.
we only introduced about 3 years ago. So in the 9 years we've only been doing this the last 3, we thought we'd throw it in because it's quite an interesting one in terms of did you take a drop in salary to get your current role, your current job? And as we can see, there's a pretty surprising number, I'd say, there in terms of over a quarter, 28% of people actually secured, got a pay drop to take their current role. Now, there could be a number of factors for that. Clearly, there is the post-recessionary factor, but that's going to become less of a factor over time. It was some time ago now. People obviously move for family circumstances, for relocation. They might want a meatier, more interesting role, or perhaps they're moving for career progression reasons. So people take pay drops, but I think it's quite a surprisingly high number. To back that up, I would surmise that actually this is even more surprising in some respects, which relates to how much of a drop people actually took to secure their latest roles. We can see there that over a quarter of people took more than 20% off their salary to secure their latest role. So to put that into context, obviously that's a £50,000 earner dropping down to 40, or a 40k earner dropping down to 32. We're talking about really significant numbers. And don't forget that's 20%. As a minimum, we're talking more than 20%. And equally, nearly half, if you include the 11 to 20%, nearly half of total respondents took a drop of between 11 to 20% and over 20%. So pretty shocking. As we've said, there are reasons for that people might take drops. The recession being one, because clearly people had to take drops in salary to get other jobs, potentially at that point. But a very surprisingly high number, I think. So the next question was around that sentiments piece that we've been talking about. It's not all clearly about the salaries and the money. And I'm pleased to report that overall, as you can see, the L&D profession are a pretty happy bunch. I think most people, the majority, over half, same last year, are quite happy, enjoy their roles. And actually what we have seen is quite a significant increase in people who love their jobs. They're very happy in them. So, you know, we all know L&D is a rewarding career, and this is borne out by the numbers. If we look at that over the course of the 9 years the salary's been going, we'll see that actually they're quite happy, enjoy their jobs, like their jobs, have always secured top spot. So it's not a case of L&D being a happy bunch just now. I think the profession generally has been that way. Slight dip, but nothing too severe, with obviously the very happies posted in second, but the job haters, the people who are really unhappy, seeing a bit of a rise there over the course of the last 3 years, but thankfully quite a small minority. So the next question was about the sentiment piece in terms of moving jobs, moving careers. What are people thinking out there in terms of that side of things? We changed this question this year. For the last 8 years, the question was, are you considering changing your role? So we thought this year that we'd make it harder hitting, a bit more specific really, so not just about changing jobs, but actually changing your current employer. So that explains the difference, the big difference to a point in the percentages, because 78% last year said that they were considering moving jobs, but a pretty astounding 55%, over 55% of people said that this year they're likely to change companies. Again, we know what potentially the reasons might be, but clearly that's a very significant number, and will relate to a degree to obviously those people who were taking pay drops and feel that perhaps even with those pay rises they can do better elsewhere. Just sticking with the reasons for leaving piece again for a moment, as we can see throughout the course of the 9 years, money has played a significant part, usually the main part, but not always. However, if you look at the next two bars in terms of the better role and better prospects, we're talking about a more challenging role and better career prospects. Actually, those two together, and they are related, obviously form the vast majority in terms of reasons, for actually looking to leave their current roles. We know that money will always play a part, but I think the point with that is that it's not the major point when you take into account better roles and better career prospects.
So we've come to the end of the data bit, so you'll probably be pleased to know we're not going to be looking at more of these complex slides. What we're going to talk about now is what we can do in terms of career progression as learning and development practitioners. There are a number of aspects of this that we can think about now. The salary survey that we talked about was generally okay. We've got reasonable confidence. But the question really is how much of it is down to the organisations that we work for to change that, to give us better career prospects, and how much of it really is down to us as individuals. Now, we do the salary survey. We're a commercial business. We do it because we need to, we hope, show some credibility to the market that we operate in, provide hopefully some value to the market. But most importantly, it's really about brand, our brand as a business, brand awareness. That's why we run the salary survey. That's why we come to Learning Technologies and we have a stand. Why am I telling you that? Well, we believe that there is a real link between what a commercial business needs to do to develop itself and what we as individuals need to do in this day and age, particularly with the advent of technology like LinkedIn, and also things like Twitter, which are really coming to the forefront. So in this just short session, we are thinking really about questions that we get asked a lot as recruiters. What can we, as individuals, do to develop our careers, our team's careers, and by default, develop our learning and development functions? The first question that we always get asked relates to qualifications, formal qualifications. People will always ask, what formal qualifications are going to help me in my career, or perhaps help me to gain a career in L&D? And if you could just think for a moment about your careers, how you found yourself in learning and development. Was it a vocational choice? Did you leave school or university thinking I want to be a learning and development manager or an instructional designer or a learning technologist? Or did you fall into learning and development? I know I did, Nick did. In fact, we both fell into recruitment as well. We're not recruiters by trade. I think a lot of people get into the markets that they operate in that way. The formal qualifications piece, and by formal qualifications, I'm thinking about things like a CIPD qualification, right the way through to master's degrees in HRM or psychology, well, there's a whole plethora of qualifications that we're all aware of. The fundamental fact for us is, or question for us really, is thinking, well, what value do we place on those formal qualifications? And we would probably argue that the value placed on those qualifications has, if not reduced, it's certainly become, it's less relevant, it has less resonance in this day and age. And the question then becomes, if that's the case, what replaces formal qualifications? That's not to say formal qualifications don't hold value, of course they do, but very often they're in the kind of nice to have tick box. In terms of a job specification, in terms of a brief from an organisation, very often they're something that isn't absolutely necessary but would be nice to have. We believe that demonstrable experience is the answer to that, and of course that's a problem, because how do you get the experience if you can't get the role in the first place? And by demonstrable experience, an example might be, we have a stand obviously downstairs. We will have people, we hope, visit us over the course of the next couple of days, and one of the kind of things that we would regularly see at something like Learning Technologies is perhaps a corporate organisation saying, look, we're going to perhaps reduce spend with an external vendor on e-learning. We need to hire some of those skills in-house, perhaps instructional design skills or content development skills. And the first thing that they'll ask for, if they don't ask for qualifications, and if they do, like I said, maybe it's that nice-to-have box, but they focus on personality, on team fit, cultural fit, the ability to articulate and understand the business that they're being hired into, most definitely those soft areas, if you like. But they do want demonstrable experience. And in that kind of discipline, it's actually relatively easy for someone to prove their skill set by way of a portfolio. You can create learning resources to demonstrate your creativity and perhaps even your technical skills. And what you can also do is not just focus on the work that you're doing in your current role. You might actually find an outside interest. You might create some resources that show your skill set and use that as part of your portfolio. We start to see a lot of that, particularly with the younger generation that are in the technical learning side. Not quite so easy if you're a learning and development manager or a L&D practitioner or a trainer. How do you demonstrate your capability in that way? And we believe that the answer to that is to really focus on your personal brand. It's a bit of a cliche, but if you think about, if you were working in an organisation for a number of years and then you decided to take a career change, maybe join a different company, perhaps when you start looking at roles, you'd have to dust off your CV. You'd have to think, well, look, I've been doing this role for 8 years. Have a look at your CV from 8 years ago, and there's going to be a big gap. You've then got to think, well, how do I articulate in this document what I've been doing over the last 8 years, the value, the credibility, the creativity? How do I go about doing that? And actually, in this day and age, what people are doing is they're creating that value in their LinkedIn profiles or in Twitter, on Twitter rather, or in the groups that they're joining on any multitude of social media. They're showing that they're engaged, they're networked, they're connected, they're perhaps peer reviewing other people's work, they're perhaps putting their own work forward in terms of case studies. All of that is creating personal brand and value. Paul Morgan, who's sat over here, if you don't know Paul, I'm sure he'll put his hand up. Put your hand up, Paul. So Paul, until very recently, was head of learning and development at Telefonica O2. And the reason why I've put this slide up here is because this is a screenshot that I took of a post that Paul had put on LinkedIn, and I asked him, he said he was very kindly let me put this up on the screen here as an example of what I mean. So Paul, I think I'm right in saying, Paul, you were surprised to find when you looked at how engaged you as a brand are or were whilst at Telefonica, you found that you were actually in the top 1%, and in fact I think you were one down from the CEO, number 2 out of 5,500 people in terms of views on LinkedIn, which is essentially brand engagement. Now that's good for a number of reasons. As it happens, Paul's left Telefonica and he's going to be launching a business as a self-employed consultant, his own business. And that's great because people will be able to see what Paul's done in the past by virtue of his brand profile. But also it was good whilst he was at Telefonica, both for him in terms of engagement, but also for his team and team members, because it pushes learning and development forward. And if there's lots of brand engagement, if you're talking about your successes, your value, your credibility, then it also means that we're talking about our successes as a learning and development function. So if we can focus on personal brand and utilise our personal brand, perhaps when we're using Twitter or the groups that we're joining, or the commentary that we're putting forward, or perhaps do a little bit more peer reviewing of work or putting forward our work as case studies, essentially we are building an online CV, a portfolio of work, which may help us in terms of career progression. Either if you start to look at an external role, because the first thing people are going to do is look at your personal brand anyway, or when you go into the business and you say, look what we've achieved, look at the engagement we have and the successes that we've got, and perhaps there's a discussion there to be had about salaries or benefits or whatever is your focus. The only other aspect one other aspect that we are starting to see a lot of relates to stakeholder engagement. And for us, we believe stakeholder engagement could read client engagement or customer engagement or relationship management. It could even read sales in terms of a skill set. And why is that important? Well, I think it was summed up last year by a lady called Shannon Tipton pretty well. She did a session here last year where she was talking about how to brand and market our learning and development function and how best to go about doing that. I think the term that she used was that she became the queen of the hallway meetings or something of that nature. She said that she encouraged her team to go out, sit down with people that they didn't know within the business, understand or ask them what they're working on, what their challenges are, how's learning and development as a function supporting you. And she found that essentially what that was doing is it was actually creating requirements, interesting requirements that maybe they hadn't thought about as a learning and development function. They were able to then really become business partners, not just in a HRBP sense or an L&D BP sense, but in a true sense. Everyone is a business partner in the L&D team, not just the person who holds that responsibility. That's the message that she gave, and it's one that we agree with, because I think increasing the visibility of personal brand with or without specific qualifications and focusing on stakeholder engagement may make the difference in terms of progressing your career if that's on your agenda. I guess the good news is that if career progression is what you're interested in, then we also believe that the number of options that we have available to us as learning and development professionals is increasing. We have the usuals, the coaching or the design roles, the delivery roles, the strategic learning and development management positions, the usual roles that were in existence many years ago. But we also have obviously now a whole new set of roles that relate to technology, maybe sometimes even deep technology. We have roles that relate to project management and program management in a way that we hadn't over the last few years. And one great example of that is what we've called on here integrated talent management. Paul Binks, who's also sat over there and will be doing a talk, I think after this one, Paul. Paul is Head of Learning and Development at a company called QuickFit, which you're probably all pretty familiar with. One of the things that QuickFit have done recently is actually absorbed recruitment as a function essentially under the learning and development banner. And we're seeing that a lot. We're seeing the potential for learning and development to actually lead the talent charge rather than HR and learning and development kind of fitting in somewhere along with recruitment. Why is that relevant? Because obviously Paul, I'm sure, would argue that recruitment, personal development, retention are all kind of one in the same, and that really that should be a learning function or could be a learning function. We're starting to see that being discussed with many of our clients, and that in itself could present a whole new range of opportunities for us as learning and development professionals. Sorry, Nick.
Thanks, Nick. Right, the next and final segment of this discussion is around skills. Primarily, what skills are in demand, both currently and going forward, and a quick look at how the L&D role of the L&D professional's role, L&D manager's role, has evolved over the course of the last 15 years in terms of ourselves and when we first started doing it. To kick things off, a pretty shocking quote here from the World Economic Forum, which states that in 5 years, over 1/3, 35% of skills that are considered important in today's workforce will have changed. That's a pretty sizable number, and I guess, you know, it brings home the rapid pace of change. Obviously, technology plays a big part in that. Talking about technology, we can see here in the 15-year time frame that we've been doing L&D recruitment that things have changed hugely in a relatively short period of time. So in 2003, the first colour mobile screens were coming out. Facebook didn't exist. Twitter didn't exist. YouTube's had a profound effect on learning, e-learning, as we know. And if we go forward to the current day, Microsoft have just launched the Microsoft HoloLens, which again could be potentially a real game changer when it comes to the L&D side of things with augmented reality and the like. So what we've got here is basically, as Blue Eskimo, as L&D recruiters, what typically clients were asking us for 15 years ago from an L&D professional or an L&D manager. So this would have been, if you like, a job description. As you can see, the focus is a lot on reactionary, kind of reaction as opposed to being proactive, a lot on logistics, a lot on delivery, design, a lot on kind of really serving perhaps the business as a waiter would in a restaurant. You know, people were asking for training. The L&D division, L&D department were there to deliver that, whether that happened to be externally via vendors or internally via the L&D department itself. But the focus was definitely more reactionary than proactive. If we look at the same role today, the L&D professional role, broadly speaking, obviously the reactive element is still there. You know, the L&D department, the L&D division is there, obviously, to react to the training, the learning needs of the business. However, there's been an increasing emphasis, really, over the course of the last few years on L&D aligning itself to the company's mission. So really what I mean by that is, why is the business successful, and how can a successful L&D function help it drive on and drive forward? Embedding a learning culture. 15 years ago, it was, as I said, about delivering what was there, what was required then and there. Now, actually, L&D is a lot about teaching people how to learn, teaching employees how to learn, so they can actually empower themselves and, to a point, do part of that themselves in their own time as and when they see fit. Nick's mentioned stakeholder engagement already, and we see that increasingly come up when our clients are talking to us about the kind of L&D professionals they want. They want people with good, strong communication and influencing skills, people who can communicate well with not just the business leaders, but the heads of departments and other people within the business, and really consult properly about their learning needs. The technology part plays a big role here in terms of measuring return on investment. I think we've seen, one of the reasons why we've seen an increased emphasis on that is actually, although Kirkpatrick and other models have been around for decades, what technology and learning technology has recently allowed us to do is obviously measure that return on investment piece a lot more effectively, and that is getting channeled through to us from clients who are asking for L&D professionals who have proven experience in that area. From a technology perspective, the same can be said to a degree about informal learning and performance support. These days, compared to 15 years ago, there are a huge array of learning technology businesses that can provide online performance support solutions and contextual, as and when you need it and want it, on-the-job learning. And what, as a result of that, we're getting is, again, clients asking for that experience. Have you got people who have done this in other businesses? Can they do it for us? For the first time ever, we've got 4 generations working together. People are delaying retirement, willingly or not. They're delaying retirement, and as a result of that, for the first time, we have 4 generations working together, from teenagers to 70-somethings. So as a result of that, the L&D professional these days is expected to manage the learning needs and the learning styles of a huge array of different people in different generations, and that again is coming to the fore. I first heard the phrase blended learning back in 2000, Paul's chuckling away over there, at a Tech Learn conference hosted by Elliott Macy in the US, and I believe that was one of the first times that the phrase blended learning had been mentioned. So, not surprisingly back then, it wasn't really part of a typical job description from a client's perspective. You know, learning management systems were around, generic content was there, things were relatively at their infancy, but blended learning wasn't getting asked for. Roll on to today, and actually we'd be pretty hard pushed probably to find many job descriptions that our clients provide that haven't got blended learning as part of an L&D professional's skill set. 15 years ago again, we were talking about point of need training in terms of people getting asked for training, maybe a training course. It was about delivering training for people when they needed it that particular day to do their particular job better. What we've got now is L&D professionals who are required to look forward and look at the talent management, talent development piece. So instead of just delivering on skills on demand for today and what's required, to actually think about things like emerging leaders and developing the skills that people in the business are going to need in years to come, not just today, tomorrow and next week. So now on to skills. What I'll be doing in a moment is actually looking to get some thoughts from you guys in terms of what skills you see as kind of hot now and maybe increasingly in demand over the years to come. What I thought I'd do is just kick off with one, which is content curation. One of the reasons I think why we've seen an increasing demand for content curation is that the huge, vast volumes of learning content and content out there on the internet primarily, but equally on learning management platforms, knowledge platforms, intranets, a huge number. To put it into context, if you look at YouTube, every minute of every day, 72 hours worth of video content is uploaded onto YouTube. So in a 24-hour period, over 100,000 hours, and that's obviously just YouTube. So you can see why skilled content curators who are able to effectively find the content that's appropriate for the organisation, filter it to make sure that is it out of date, is it objective, is it quality, is it truthful, all these kind of criteria. Software tools can help, but human skills have to come into play. Humans have to interpret it, the L&D professional has to interpret it to make sure that it's right for the relevant audiences. And then of course share it. There's no point in finding the content if you can't promote it within the organisation and share it in the right context, because some learning obviously is going to be a lot more relevant and appropriate than other learning. I think the other reason why content curation has come to the fore as well is if it's done effectively, and we have seen this already within organisations thus far, it can substantially reduce informal training delivery costs. So there's a real need there, there's a real kind of incentive, if you like, from the top down for skilled content curators. So that's me done, at least for the time being anyway. We've got a few other points that we might come back to if we haven't covered them off. That's what these are about. But for now, I'd like to kind of get hands up and see what thoughts people have got about their what they see as skills now and skills going forward that are going to be particularly in demand.
Yeah, hi Nick. I think agility. So I guess on two angles. Number one, the agility needed within a business. To, your slide previously showing the so the last 15 years in terms of, absolutely right in the middle of the technological revolution, businesses are needing to change very quickly to keep up. So the agility within an organisation's workforce, and as a result, the agility within an L&D professional to be able to meet those changing business demands. Yeah,
no, it's a very good point, Paul. I think that point, in terms of the multi-generational aspect as well, in terms of being able to be agile enough to foresee the different learning needs and the learning styles of employees in an ever-changing technological world. Yeah.
Thank you. It's not a new skill, but being able to understand business requirements, being a good learning consultant, or just being a good consultant generally, especially working in large organisations that are effectively multiple businesses under one roof, is absolutely critical. You need to be able to not just determine the top business understanding, business requirement, but also understand what the SME level requirement is and help turn that into something that can be used effectively. So I think finding the right consultant is still the most important skill that we have. I work for Credit Suisse and Peter Fox.
We definitely are seeing exactly that. People are asking for consultants in the same way that they're thinking about stakeholder engagement, because how can you engage with your stakeholders if you then can't articulate a solution that's appropriate and fit for purpose. It's that consulting suite of skills. It's the ability to understand what the business needs and then obviously to formulate that back into a solution. There are some parallels there with the commercial world. You know, a salesperson in the old days, you know, was perhaps someone that was going to come out and you perhaps would pull something out of a bag. Do you want to buy some of this? Nowadays, it's all about solution selling. They've got to have the same set of listening skills, and they also have to be able to articulate that solution and to position it for smart buyers. And we are definitely finding consulting skills, stakeholder engagement, those personality traits as probably the number one thing that we're getting asked for, I think, in terms of skill sets. Difficult to quantify, but most definitely those skills are really important.
And I think also on the design side of things as well there, from the point of view of being able to, there's such a huge array of not just content available as we've discussed, but so many different ways of delivering that content that if you've got you know, a consultative focused designer within the business, then they can help interpret the need, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, a 30-minute module of e-learning. It could be a quick communication by any format, even email to a point. So I think it's a very good point there in terms of having someone who, from a design perspective as well, can interpret the content and decide the most appropriate way of pushing it out there, because there's so many ways of doing that these days.
Sorry, Judy, we're making you run there, aren't we?
Hi, guys. I'm not necessarily seeing the skills change a lot, but what I'm seeing is a change in where the skill sets are sitting. For instance, instructional designer with a strong e-learning content background would have been a very precious skill 5 years ago, whereas now I'm seeing subject matter experts getting upskilled on using tools so that they can put content out there directly. So it actually is just much more efficient and effective, and you know, you're always struggling to pin the subject matter experts down, and now you can just ask them to do it themselves. So more around the shift in where the skills is as opposed to new skills. Definitely.
That's a really, really good point, because a few years ago, what was an instructional, well, even now, what is an instructional designer? Because if someone comes to us and says, I want an instructional designer, the first thing we have to ask is, well, what exactly do you mean? Because is it a learning person? Is it pedagogy that you're interested in? Or is it technology? And 9 times out of 10, it's such a grey area, it's so skewed. But most importantly, with any instructional designer position that we have been dealing with recently, it's that stakeholder engagement piece again. It's being able to work with subject matter experts. But if your subject matter experts were actually capable of doing the learning piece or even the content development piece, then perhaps you don't need an instructional designer at all. I think that's the point that you were trying to make, and we're seeing exactly that. You know, we're seeing a swapping of roles, a movement, a fluidity of the roles that we haven't seen in previous years, partly driven by technology, but partly driven by the ability to have those consulting skills in-house that help us to be able to create better learning. Is certainly what we're finding.
And I think as well, a phrase of sorts, instructional content development. I think, you know, whether it comes from the ID content developer or the SME, I think because of the increased insourcing of e-learning design over the course of the last few years, it was the domain very predominantly of the vendors and the commercial providers a decade ago. That has shifted. We spend at least half of our time recruiting now for private sector academic institutions, as Nick's mentioned, as we do for the vendor community. And I think because of that, if you're a private sector organisation, for example, and you want an instructional designer, you want to make some learning, the vendors have got the money to get graphic designers, instructional designers, e-learning content developers, the whole kit and caboodle, because that's what they do. But the average private sector business or public sector business needs someone who's going to instructionally content develop. So they need someone who's going to be an instructional designer and understand the learning pedagogy, the storyboarding, but equally have an element of technical proficiency to be able to use the software tools. And I also think that, just on that point, that content developers, an increasing in-demand skill is for technically proficient content developers who are good collaborators and understand learning. They don't have to be instructional designers, but if they can liaise well and collaborate well with instructional designers, but they're technically proficient and savvy with what they do, that's an in-demand skill. Anyone else got any thoughts? Or
Sorry, Julie.
have you got the mic there, Julie? Okay.
Yes,
yeah,
certainly.
fine, yeah.
Sorry.
Do you want me to? You okay? Come on, Don, get out.
Come on, Julie. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. I think change management, because we are, as a L&D community, really not selling content or trainings anymore. We really want to sell solutions, but we really, as L&D, have to take the business with us and change this paradigm.
That's, again, a great example, because in previous years, we always found that change management was very much a bit of a dark art, and that we weren't asked for real, tangible change management experience in relation to learning and development roles very often. Now we are, which means that people that have got learning and development, they're practitioners of learning and development, have either got change management experience or they've been in businesses that have gone through significant change. And I think many of us, by default, have, because of the economic cycle that we've just been through. So change management becomes really important. I'd say I mean, we had it on the slide before in terms of roles. I believe that there are pure change management roles that are L&D positions that are starting to come through. We're starting to see that perhaps that is a whole area that we're going to have to really get to grips with as a community. I think we've got. Do you want us to wrap up, Julie?
Got a couple of minutes. Anyone else?
I'm sure you guys all want to get a drink or maybe a bite to eat before your next sessions. You're going to have a busy afternoon, hopefully a good afternoon.
This is just to wrap it up, I guess. We obviously haven't got time to go into any detail, but I guess some of the takeaways from our perspective, some of the skills that we are seeing is either increasingly in demand, or indeed we expect certainly to be more in demand for the years to come. So are we out of time, Julie, or you go? So, I mean, we've already covered quite a lot of this already. The content development piece, agility, content curation, the consultative approach, the ability to communicate, eke out the detail of the learning in terms of objectives. Commercial awareness really is about, for example, mobile learning. You know, is mobile learning necessarily the best way forward? It's not the cheapest necessarily method of learning delivery, just because it's something that's, you know, in vogue and has been for several years. It's really looking at the commercial impact and the return on investment piece from a learning perspective, really. What difference is it going to make to the organisation? It's going to cost something. Is it worth it? Virtual technologies, really that's covering both virtual classroom. We've seen that increase.
I think we need to wrap this up. These guys have got other sessions to go to.
Are they coming in? Yeah.
Thanks very much for coming on. I appreciate it's a lunchtime session. You're going to have a busy afternoon. You're going to have a busy day tomorrow. If you at any point want to come and have a conversation with us, we'll be around for the 2 days. I'm sure if you want to, you'll find us somewhere up on the conference floor or downstairs in the exhibition hall. So thanks very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick and Nick. Do you just want to put up your slide where people can get the survey?
Yeah, sorry, should have said. You can
Yeah.
download the full
You've got a
results of the
slide for
survey
that.
from our website if you want to.
Thank you very much.